So rude. Okay, so now my otters decided to show. Anyhow, deep breath. We'll get going. And I know that you're right. After this, everybody's going to be tuning in.
Hope you're ready, because when this gets up there, they're gonna be like, "Oh snap!" Yes.
The day I went viral, the day I got big is the day that I had Dr. Cruz. Oh gosh, I just messed it up. The day I went viral, the day I blew up, is the day that I had Dr. Daniel Cruz Lattimore on my podcast. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to start where I always start, which is how do we know each other?
By and large, I'd like to say we've known each other for centuries and past lives. Really like a Ad Astra vibe of like Tom Hanks and Halle Berry. Just different lifetimes we've known each other. But in this lifetime, we've known each other since SCP. And I know that it might have been those things where we walked past one another, maybe overheard each other's conversations, but formally it was when you became president and really like took the center stage of SCP. And I was like, okay, all right, we're in here. And yeah, I think that was the first time of formally getting to know you. But you said you might remember it different.
So I do remember that as the first time that we actually formally got to know one another. I think that we met for the first time at the SCP conference. It was the Midwinter Conference in Manhattan Beach.
Okay.
I remember that I was a little jet lagged because I had just come back from Australia. So I had really wanted to be at the SCP conference. And I also wanted to go and give a talk at the BEST conference. They had the Behavioral Economics Society and Technology Center, as in center, but with an RE. And so it was the BEST Center. So they would have the BEST conference and then they would have the BEST paper. And I was like, we see what you're doing there. But actually, it's like the best kept secret in all of behavioral science. Like, it's a fantastic conference. It's in February, which is their summer, in
Oh.
Brisbane. I know, Brisbane, San Antonio minus the Alamo. It's fantastic.
Okay.
And they had got a great conference. So I really, really wanted to go because I've been to every conference. I even attended virtually during COVID. I've been to every one of their conferences since they launched.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm going to be there. And the way I had to do the timing was I landed in LA coming back. I think I flew home through Melbourne. I landed in LA at like 6 o'clock in the morning and I just went straight to the conference.
Oh my God.
I think
Like,
Dina Gianta and I were speaking. Thankfully, it was the next day. So I did actually get some real sleep, but it was fantastic. Y'all did a great job. And now you have continued your volunteer involvement with SCP. You are the community domain leader, and you have been crushing it.
oh, oh, there is an I in community. There's no I in community. There is an I. There's no me, but there is unity and some other letters in there. So I want to give a shout out to the membership of SCP, the team for just staying engaged, staying active and passionate about what is consulting psychology and all its remnants. So I'm happy to stand on the podium because not everybody will fit, but just know that when I'm up there, everyone's up there.
Well, I have to say that I've had the opportunity to both get to know you, but also to observe you in action, to see you work. And if I was asked to describe you, I would say that Daniel is someone for whom community is extremely important. Family, community, connection, relationship. Those are the words I think of when I think about you. And I'm curious, how has that evolved in your life and how does that show up?
It will probably start with my energy with comedy. So if you Google me and like research, you'll find that like comedy is what I studied. I even like presented abroad on the role of affiliative humor within international student populations in the United States. Comedy, I will say, has been kind of the fulcrum because I started out as a stand-up comedian. I would be inspired by just everything, like things that I found funny or like at least had the role of making others laugh. But it got lonely on that stage sometimes. It did. Not to take away from stand up. It's a beautiful art. But for me, I was like, okay, it's a lot of onus into like connecting with the crowd, trying to think about or guess what they might find funny and then put it in a format. And then in the past 12 years or so, I've been involved with improvisation. So just being able to share the funny, the onus of the funny, and then like the recipients. It's like, okay, now we're creating like a culture of comedy that people can actively involve with, and they know that it's not set up in any way, that it's like when you're coming in, it's going to be spontaneous ideation in the way that is helpful for everyone, or like trying to get into a surprise factor, and generally for the benefit. I can't speak for improv all over the world. The rooms that I'm a part of, I try to incorporate that.
So I'm really curious. Tell me more about what you learned about international students in comedy.
That TV plays a big role. That not even when we're talking about language, at least in the studies that I looked at, were the role of shows like Friends and sitcoms, that people were looking to not only to learn a language like a Seinfeld, that they were looking for the language, looking for the punchline, and that it was a way to come into like the United States really in certain spaces and communities and cultures. So it's like trying to share jokes, or to combine on what people might find funny. It's a general positive affect in cognitive space. Humor really has a big part in that space.
So I'm curious, how did you get from stand up comedy
Mm.
to PhD in psychology?
I bombed on stage and I took an alternate path. So I told myself like, oh man, I was in college and I really caught a lucky break, like a very like spontaneous, serendipitous moment of like, Daniel, do you want to go on stage? And I was like, yes, like I think this is what I thought at the time was like the biggest thing for me, and was not prepared for it. Was not prepared for it in the slightest. But because it was my movie moment, I thought I was. I was like, this is where the music picks up, and the soundtrack is just amazing. And now there's a montage of me like reading different 5-minute sets. I'm like, yeah, that's funny. That's not funny. And I'm just gonna crush it in front of this crowd. And then I bombed. And I was like, I don't know if this is it for me ever again. But it wasn't. It was like comedy was the medium. Comedy was the thing, but I was gonna try to find the medium for the comedy. So then I was like, well, maybe it's not stand up, because I bombed really heavily. And I mean, granted, any stand up comedian is going to bomb, and they get back up on that horse and keep continuing to practice. But for me, in my egocentric 19-year-old self, I was like, this is it. I don't know. It's done. Stand up maybe can take a step back, but I can't be done with comedies. And I was already in college, so I was like, okay, how can I infuse comedy into what I'm doing, which is at the time therapy was the focus in psychology as a whole. So I was like, how can I embed it into my research? How can I embed it into my clinical practice? Well, we know when comedy goes wrong and comedy goes right. When you think of comedy and therapy, some people might naturally see the correlation, but others are like, oh my God, I can't see doing comedy in therapy. Like, I can't make fun of someone's what they're bringing in. When you learn the functionality of comedy, when you really study it and expand on it, it's like, okay, how can I utilize its benefits, be cognizant or aware of the points where it's not a time for comedy, and use it as a tool, just as you would other things you're learning in class.
I know that through comedy and also through in particular for me, self-effacing humor is
Sure.
has been a great mechanism for me to overcome some of my own insecurities and my own challenges, because I can just name them and put them out there. And when I laugh at them, they are less powerful.
Yeah.
And I found that to be very valuable. I've also been, I mean, from the time I was very young, I've always leaned toward comedy. I lean into comedy. I appreciate what it is that humor can bring to us, and I also appreciate how you are walking the line between How do you introduce comedy and humor into a setting that is very, I mean, that finds people very vulnerable? Therapy finds people in a vulnerable state. And oftentimes, the more vulnerable they are able to be in that state, the more progress they'll make toward where they ultimately want to get. And you have to be careful because in that vulnerable state, humor can cut a lot of different ways.
Absolutely.
I'm curious what it was that inspired psychology in the first place.
Yes, I tell this story often, like especially if I'm speaking to our younger leaders that might be in first generational low income spaces, but also to leaders of corporations. I say I was in a room, and I do want to touch on you speaking on vulnerability as well, because I was in a room. It was my college orientation, and I did not know what I wanted to do. I knew I was going to go to college, but I didn't know what I was going to be studying for. And talk about the pressure alone of going undecided, and then the shame, the stigma behind not knowing, because like I'm here in post secondary. I want to, I know I want to get a degree, but I don't know what in yet. And just this underlying pressure of needing to know. And then doubling down on people coming in and speaking to, like, knowing, like, hey, if I'm going to be a biomed major, if I'm going to be pre-med, if I'm going to be law, and then seeing people get up, go and follow their paths. So it's like, oh my gosh, I'm at the quest, I'm at the fork in the road, I don't know which way to go. The time is running out, and I closed my eyes. I closed my eyes and said, if I could have any superpower, what would it be? And it was like flying, teleportation. I was like, that's dumb. We're not there yet. It's 2009. There's no way we have that kind of technology, at least publicly. And then I was like, okay, let's revisit. So I closed my eyes again. I was like, okay, I would read minds if I had any superpower. And then someone says, if you want to be psychology and like majoring in psychology, come follow me. And I got up and I followed.
And a lot of people are very glad that you did. So again, like I've had this opportunity to both know you as well as to, again, observe you working, see your presentations, see how you show up in these spaces. And you bring both the humor, like the humor is always there. And part of that is making it very accessible for people. It feels less scary. It feels more like you can be yourself and you can relax into these spaces. And that's what makes it possible for people to engage in topics that can be really hard. And a lot of what we do in psychology, particularly the area that you and I are in now, which is more applied psychology, we're actually looking at the health and well-being of organizations, leaders in organizations, employees in organizations. And there's a lot of really hard topics that we deal with. Organizations have a lot of similarities with the systems we see in families. I'm really curious to hear more from you about where where are you most excited about the work you're doing right now, and where do you want to take it?
I would start with destigmatizing or demystifying the process of humor in these spaces. So you mentioned that it is akin to a family dynamic. Well, is anyone, now that you're going to have millions of listeners on this podcast when we conclude, I would charge anyone to think about like an argument they had with a family member or a spouse, and think about a time that humor was used and it went it was mistimed or poorly timed, and think about a time where humor like eased the tension, brought it back to the 10,000 foot view of why we were, what are we really talking about? How are we in alignment with our values? So if I could do anything, it would be first to be in a space where people can expand their thought process on what humor can do in this space. And that would be for anybody to say, they're like, Daniel, we work with millions of clients every day. The last thing they want to do is hear me tell a joke. I was like, okay, I can understand that. But if you had a million clients, wouldn't you want a million chances to ease their minds? when you want a million chances to have them take a beat or take a breath, a pause, and look at a bigger picture of how you both can communicate better. So it's like if we can start to change the perspective on what humor can do, I think we'd be in a better space. Because I think people sometimes have the expectation of like, I'm bringing you my issue and you're laughing at it. And that's what humor would do. It's like, that's what humor could do if not trained. If you can hear that and trust that we as your consultant, as your coach can understand where you're coming from and that we are well informed and that we are utilizing this tool in the best way possible that aligns with your values. I think that's where I'd like to start.
I love how you continue to have these full circle moments. You started with comedy and then you found where that comedy could lead you, where humor could lead you. That wasn't necessarily to the stand-up stage. It was to other stages. And so you've expanded the number of stages on which you perform and you show up. And I almost wonder if the performance that didn't go as you hoped that it would, if that was really an unlock, because it seems to me that you were, you would have been quite limited if the stage on which you found your initial success was the stand-up stage. I think of all the people whose lives would not have been touched by your work so far and who I know will be touched by your work into the future.
I
And none of
appreciate
that
that.
would be if you were confined to that single stage, then the rest of it wouldn't be possible. Whereas now there is nothing from ever keeping you going back to that stage. And you have so many others open to you.
Absolutely. I love that you mentioned it as a full circle moment because that's where we're at. We're kind of halfway into the circle where it's like, okay, Simba got shamed from Pride Rock. Now he's hanging out with a warthog and a meerkat doing his dances. And the dance is like helping people understand themselves. And I'm a psychologist and I love that. And then the full circle moment will be back when you see me on the screen and I'll tell people, hey, like, Daniel, when was the moment that you really enjoyed from your past life as a psychologist? Because now you're this big time actor. I was like, well, it was probably on Liz's podcast. Please go back and look at that because that was a turning point for me. It's an understanding that we serve community and I can serve a lot better now that I'm a multi-million dollar actor sitting across from Denzel Washington or his son, John David. So
What do you want people to know about you? What matters to you that people know about you beyond the degree and the titles and the profile?
I think I would love for people to know one is that if I'm in a position to help, that I will more than likely help. If you can get really good about the ask of the type of help you need, I can, I will go into my brain, my eccentric fun brain and think about the most creative way that we can go about it that's cost effective. And if not, I will then think about who I can get you in contact with because the ultimate goal was that you asked for help, that you needed help in some space from format and that this help will then better the community that in which you serve. So when you have those as your North Star, there's little that I would not do to help you. I would do most everything in my power that from the resources that I have. If you're good about your ask and that you understand how I operate or that you're in the space of needing help. That's what I would say. It won't be the perfect space. I don't believe in a perfection. I believe in progress. So if you're willing and able, then we will make it happen. We, not an I, not a you, but a we. Well, I mean, you ultimately will make it happen, but that I will reach out into the community and we will collectively get it done.
What do you find most helpful to you right now as you are growing and building your own business?
So I used to work with the VA. Very shout out to the Veterans Affairs, the Healthcare Administration, the VHA specifically. And there was a program called VA Voices that I love being a part of. And some part of that curriculum was the understanding of the leader and the follower and any kind of certain team dynamic that you have. So there will be times where I will serve as leader and again, eccentric creative ideation viewpoint for me is what you'll get is that I would say, hey, I have this vision, I have this thought. And I would be very grateful for the people who say, hey, you know what, Daniel, I know your character. I know who you are. I've seen the work that you do. I've heard your podcast with Liz and I've got a feel for who you are. And I'd like to support you. I'd like to support you in ways that I can. So I will recognize that if I can get that support, that'd be great. Conversely, if you have an idea that you'd like to pitch to your team and you don't know how they'll go about it, or if it's a little out there, it's a little eccentric, I don't mind playing the role of first follower. If we have a conversation and I can support you, I'd love to be helpful in terms of communication because that would be point and space that I feel comfortable in. So in this entrepreneurship space, being able to identify times where you're wanting to support someone's mission because you understand how it ties to a greater community, or if you're in a space where you're trying to lead and you're looking for support, then I'd love to be a part of that.
Something you're really excited about right now?
But something I'm really excited about right now. You know, it's hesitant. I'm hesitant. I've been hurt before, but there's the new Superman coming out. I'm really excited about that. The James Gunn, brilliant mind, Guardians of the Galaxy changed my life. Like, you want to talk about the role of music as a connecting space. Like, if you put a hat on to Daniel, I just got a hat all of a sudden and it said community. Like Daniel's a community guy. Think about like the connecting spaces. So we talked about humor. Music is another great connector. James Gunn at the helm of Superman, I think of the characters that he builds. I think about the music choices of any kind of movie, things people can get behind of that connect them to their why and their ability to just do good for good's sake.
It's interesting you bring up music. I had a chat with another colleague of ours in the Society of Consulting Psychology, Dr. Sunny Lampasso, about her
Yes.
work with DJs and about how music brings people together and creates communities. And also something you mentioned earlier about the loneliness of the single stand-up comic. And it's similar for the DJ. The DJ is up on stage alone, maybe surrounded by hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands or more people who are energized and brought together by their music. And when the crowds go home, they are again by themselves. And so Sunny was talking about her work with, world touring DJs and the fact that they all need help and support in their corner
Mm.
because there is both connection and community, but also the potential for loneliness. And when I think of a character like Superman, Superman is revered and loved and receives all of this adulation for being a superhero. And at the end of the day, there is an incredible loneliness to Superman. Superman is unique on Earth as one of a kind. And there is a disconnection from his own people. And there is this realization that he may be in a place, but he will never be truly of that place in his experience on Earth. And when I think about the original Superman movies, I grew up in New York City, and I remember one of the most thrilling moments of my very young life was that I did walk into Christopher Reeve on the street. Oh my
Wow.
gosh. What an icon. What an icon.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the work that he and his late wife, Dana, did beyond for people with spinal cord injuries and then her activism for cancer. I mean, the whole Reeve family has done really incredible work. So, I
Mm.
mean, even above and beyond that, I mean, you just looked at him and you were like, if anyone here was going to save the world, you really look the part.
Yeah.
And I remember just being so struck by how in the movies he was very funny. Part of how he managed his whole persona was humor. And so it's fascinating to me that you bring up Superman and the new movie when that is really the arc of this character, is someone who was among his people, who was then put off on his own, who created a whole community around him, who has done so much to give back, right? To try, I mean, literally to save the world.
Yeah.
And then at the same time is also facing this tremendous isolation and loneliness in the midst of all of these accolades. And I think about how you described, your own journey and then working with leaders who experience this as well. In organizations, it is typical that, we revere our leaders, that oftentimes we put them on a pedestal, maybe not quite to the level of Superman, but we assign a certain level of almost infallibility to them that's frankly both untrue and largely unfair. We often look to leaders and organizations as our saviors, and leadership itself can be a very lonely undertaking.
I so appreciate what you've spoken to about the role of loneliness. And Liz, you just love the storytelling ability to weave in like the sense of loneliness from Superman into like just the stand-up comedian, like masterclass. People will go back and read the transcripts and be like, they talk about this in their undergrad. So did you see how she? Because I told you this is going to be famous. So they're going to be like, they're going to study this back. But something you hit on of like the loneliness of professions. So like, yes, we are able to talk about Superman and tangible and like the weight of the crown of having all that power and then what to do with it. Cause he could have easily been like, no, I'm not going to save the world. But that was just part of his character. But if we take it to the tangible real world, you spoke to Christopher Reeve and just hit what he meant as an icon and how he maybe understood or handled the transition of losing your mobility. But then I also think of, I don't know if you know the Robin Williams story as it relates to Christopher Reeve. So like, I think about the role of humor and like what we utilize as like a functionality of it in this space is that he's not making fun of it, but he's able to utilize his humor as his tool to cheer up someone that has made such an impact on other people. So people facing an almost, I don't even know if you meant to do it, but just like Christopher Reeve facing isolation, and Williams facing isolation in points. Stand-up comedians can face isolation, but there's also this kind of unwritten space of like, you hang out with other stand-up comedians, you might, if you're in a good space, you can share jokes. They can give advice. You might hit up open mics together. And with our leaders in organizations, they might feel like that the crown is heavy, but how do you build community with leaders? How do you build that sense of camaraderie, but then also respecting boundaries and spaces to understand that there are power dynamics in the room? It's that you don't have to give all of yourself to a space, but that you come to grips with, how lonely it can be in your space. So I think that's another tenet of why I love being a community domain chair, because I understand what it is to be isolated, to feel like I'm not, that I sometimes can't connect to folks in this space. So why not utilize one, owning my own eccentric ways, but then also understanding why it's tied to my bigger why, connecting people.
Now that was the masterclass. Who do you most want to talk to right now, and who would you like to come seek you out?
I would like to be sought out by leaders who are looking who have identified part of their why as being connected to their company, their group, or are seeking to build connection in their spaces. Yes,
Thank you for propelling this humble podcast
absolutely.
into all it could be. Thank you for being my friend.
Yes.
As I noted earlier, I've been in situations where leadership has been lonely. And one of the things that I can say about SCP is that I don't experience that. And
Excellent.
partially it's because of the trio. there are always three people in the sort of the inner decision-making circle, the immediate past president, the current president, and the president-elect. So we're always in dialogue with each other. It never feels like there's no one to bounce an idea or get feedback or support from. And then the executive board, of which you are a member. And feeling like people have my back, feeling like I have theirs. It's symbiotic, it's complementary, and feeling that each of us is bringing something of ourselves, our own style and approach, but toward a common aim. And that is building community in our profession. It is, as we just spent this time doing, helping people to see what it is that our profession brings to the world. That's really magical. And so I am both appreciative and honored to be on that journey with you. So thank you so much for coming on the pod. And as I said, for now making us go viral and blow up.
Yes, thank you, Liz. Now that I know it's audio, this will be the speaking voice moving forward. But I so appreciate your time and your candor and your leadership and the Society of Consulting Psychology. We very much appreciate your tutelage and your overall energy, because it is of a camaraderie standpoint and not a siloed one. So thank you again.
All right, I'm going to burst out laughing with that voice. Thank you, Daniel.
Absolutely.